It's been a while since Season 5 of Smite was released onto the live client, and I think it's about time we take a look back and see if many of our expectations actually came true, if the changes that we wanted were achieved, and where there's still areas to work on, where there's still room for improvement. As such, in this video we're going to do a bit of a comparison between Season 4, Season 5, what has changed and what has stayed the same. So first of all, the most obvious one for Season 4 and Season 5 are the changes in the map. In Season 4, the map as a whole was rather bland and it was somewhat outdated as well. It just didn't feel fresh anymore as we had that map for so long, and many of the other game modes actually had nicer maps at that point. In Season 5, this was generally adjusted. The skybox looks nicer, the map itself is more vibrant, more colorful. It has a new style that not everyone likes, but overall I think the majority of people does think that it looks nicer. There is still the Chaos side looking a fair bit more bland than the Order side, which has been an ongoing problem pretty much. But all in all, we can say that the map is a fair bit more pleasing to the eye. Size-wise, the Season 4 map was pretty small. That was actually a bit of a down and an upside at the same time compared to other MOBAs at the time, as it would allow for a lot of fights across the map, a lot of rotations happening very quickly. There was even the chance to have a very high impact by rotating out between two waves and not miss a wave and still be there for a fight or something like that. So it was very easy to get from A to B on that map. But that came with a downside that there was very little solo play overall. There were little exchanges between players that did not include a third party, except for maybe in solo lane. And overall, that meant that there was a lot of interaction between players going on at all times. In Season 5, the map size was drastically increased, meaning that we now have longer rotation times. Along with the visual changes, the jungle now actually looks like a jungle, and the size has a major factor here as well, so the jungler has some room to roam in there. And 1v1 trades are a lot more likely. This also means that the support is more likely to stay in duo lane longer, as rotating out isn't as simply done, which kinda changes the meta in quite a few regards, and kinda reshapes the game in that way, which I think is also refreshing for most players. Another thing that is very refreshing in that regard is the difference in sharing. In Season 4, we were sharing all the time. XP was shared often between the mid laner and the jungler, not only in the lane but also on the jungle camps in between, so they would often rotate together. Then later in the season we had the support rotating in more, we had the jungler rotating more with the solo laner and all that kind of stuff going on. But it's basically almost always two people doing things together, if not three people hanging around mid lane a lot of the time. This had some perks. For example, ADCs were therefore able to solo farm more often, and for them it was beneficial, but overall it made the game a little more unpleasant for at least three players that were really dependent on their allies doing the same thing they are doing, or being on the same page at least. In Season 5, sharing is not exactly completely useless or horrible, but it's a lot less beneficial than it was previously with the changed values in that regard, and the bigger map and resulting bigger jungle and bigger distance between different camps as well. So everything kind of disencourages the sharing meta that we had before, and that's what we're generally seeing. Obviously, we'll still see the jungler occasionally sharing a wave here and there, and especially the support still depends on sharing in many situations and only will occasionally clear some back copies on his own or something like that. But in general, we can definitely say there is less sharing than before, and that is mostly a good thing. Sharing is now more done to get specific benefits, like for example as a mid laner hitting level 2 from the first wave, and not as much because you feel absolutely forced to do it in all situations and it's the only way to do it. And that brings us to one of the biggest points whenever we talk about Smite and the state of the game in general, and that is balance. I will say that even in Season 4, Smite as a whole was balanced in most regards. I would say generally speaking, the gods were overall balanced with some outliers, and the items were overall balanced with some outliers. We definitely had some gods that stayed under the radar, and we had some very strong gods that didn't see nerfs. This especially happened towards the end of the season, and it was kinda questionable, to say the least. In Season 5, this is to some degree different. I would say the guard balance overall is still really good. I would say it is better than in Season 4, and we see more of those problem characters being tackled, and it happens much quicker. And obviously there are some outliers that are kind of created by other changes at the moment. So for example, we have a ton of item changes that are going on, and with every item change you can have some guard that suddenly does very, very well with that particular item and just overperforms and then needs to be toned down individually. We, for example, saw that happening with Freya or with certain guards that relied on crit and things like that. But that doesn't ruin balance as a whole. On the other hand, we still have some of those guards under the radar, but we see steps being taken. For example, Arachne recently got a buff after a very long time going without a proper buff. There is some change being made that could in the long run be impactful. Moving over to item balance, there were some problem items last season. One of the bigger deals back then was just the dominance of certain builds on hunters, as well as Rod of Tahuti. We also had a very heavy dominance of starter items, especially Bumba's Mask standing out here, something that was sometimes built by 3 or more members of each team. In Season 5, this problem has been tackled to some degree. Many of the super core items have been nerfed and changed, like a Rod of Tahuti, and at the same time certain builds have been adjusted, so there's more balance between crit and pen on hunters again, for example. So there's definitely more room in that regard. And also, starter items are no longer a thing, we now have blessings instead. And as these blessings are very beneficial for each individual class at this point, almost no one except the jungler will go into Assassin's Blessing. We see the support doing it sometimes in specific god niche picks, but overall, it's safe to say that Assassin's Blessing is not super frequently used outside of the jungle role. It comes with a bit of a downside, and that is that Assassin's Blessing is arguably the weakest blessing at the moment. It's definitely not among the better blessings in terms of the pure stats it provides and everything else surrounding it. So there's that downside that kinda should be tackled in the long run, hopefully without pushing it again so that everyone wants to pick it up. Season 4 also had a crap ton of performance issues. Now, performance issues are kind of an ongoing thing with Smite, and they're probably never gonna go away unless we get a complete reboot on the new Unreal Engine. But I will say that I have experienced less issues in that regard with Season 5, and I know I'm not the only one. Obviously, this is not the case for everyone. For some, there are more issues now because something didn't work out well, but overall it seems to be better for most. There are less complaints about performance overall. So it seems like all the background changes that have been done were actually impactful. There was another thing that had a lot of background changes, and that is matchmaking. In Season 4, matchmaking, honestly, was pretty atrocious. There was a variety of games that I could point out really easily that just didn't make any sense. Even knowing how the algorithm works now, they were basically all just down to, well, the system must have just given up. And in Season 5, that hasn't changed at all. Even though there were some background changes, I did not see any impact in improvement in terms of the matchmaking performance. And quite the opposite actually happened, considering that we are supposed to have a bigger player base right now with all the players coming back, and queue times seem to be shorter due to the changed algorithm as well. The matches have actually gotten worse for me personally, and I know that I'm not speaking just for myself here. The same complaints can be heard for ranked all the time, so overall it's safe to say matchmaking definitely did not improve by a noticeable margin. And I think this will remain one of Smite's biggest ongoing issues, and I really hope there's gonna be more focus on that in order to make the game experience better for everyone. Then there is the UI and HUD. Season 4's UI and HUD looked pretty outdated. The sci-fi look in the main menu always was a bit weird, and most people never really liked that, and it was announced that it was gonna be overhauled. And the in-game HUD, it looks like it's way outdated, and that's because it actually is. It is basically the same as in the first season. And guess what? That hasn't changed at all in Season 5. It was announced, I think 8 months ago at this point, that there should be changes to that, but that has still not happened. Maybe it will happen soon, who knows? We can just keep waiting and hoping, but we can only say that so far we have not seen any changes in that regard, and it would be really good if they would come soon. The game duration in Season 5 seems to be a little bit better than in Season 4. It seems that there are less games that are just straight up surrendered at 10 minutes. Many games seem to go around half an hour-ish, which I think is a good time, so that has improved a fair bit. And while the objectives overall didn't change much, there was a minor change with the changes to the Pyromancer instead of the Portal Demon, making that objective a bit more impactful in not only contesting the Fire Giant but having multiple options, while making contesting the Fire Giant a little bit harder at the same time through that objective. As such, I think Season 5 is on a very good way, and many of the improvements that were aimed for have been achieved, but there are a few glaring issues that should still be tackled as soon as possible to make the experience as good as possible for everyone. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. If you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and the bell, it really helps me out. See you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out. So I actually figured out my demonetization issue, and it was my outro. As such, feel free to click any of the links around here right now. There will be new outro music as soon as I find something nice. Until then, as you guys requested, I will do the outro music myself. You're welcome.